Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to this webinar with Alan Fell. Thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Just while we wait to allow the virtual room to fill up, I just want to introduce myself. My name's Fossey Qureshi. I am the General Manager at Informa Connect Academy. Thank you for joining us for this really exciting and interesting webinar. Just while we wait to do the official introduction, if I can just get a few people just to shout out from where you're coming from in terms of your location. It's always good to sort of see where everyone's dialing in from. So whilst we're waiting for everyone to log in, that'd be great. So get some engagement going as well. I was just, in the meantime, I was talking to Alan, who's based in the UK at the moment. We were talking about the weather and where the sunset times around the world. So it's a really interesting time. We've also just changed our clock, Alan, so we're now night time is quite early these days, having just come from daylight savings. So everyone's mood is a little bit, shall I say, different these days with the early afternoons and evenings. But you know, we get used to it very quickly. So let's see where we've got. If we can get people just you joining us. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate your time. If I can just get you to tell me where you're coming in from, where you're located in the chat box. It's always nice to sort of see the location of our visitors and our guests on these webinars. To reiterate, I'm the General Manager at Informa Connect Academy. I really appreciate you being with us. You're in for a treat this afternoon with Alan Fell talking about making your strategy work. And yeah, really excited to see what Alan has to share with us this afternoon. We might just give it another 2 or 3, well, 20 or 30 seconds, I should say, just to allow for everyone to come in, and then we'll get the official webinar underway. Lovely. I think I'm gonna try and pronounce this person's name. I do apologize in advance, but Leanne, who's in Queensland in Childers. Thank you for joining us, Leanne. Really appreciate it. We've got a couple of people coming in from Melbourne. Sydney's always a popular destination as usual. Let's see, we got a couple from Singapore, which is good. International audience. I know that I think we're expecting some people from the Solomon Islands, one of our regular customers, Alan, as you would know. So we're excited to have them as well. All right, so I think what we'll do, Alan, in the interest of time, I think we'll get started. Hello, Fran. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate you being with us. So just to reiterate, thank you for very good, Jocelyn, joining in from Melbourne. Thank you very much. What we'll do is we'll get started officially. So thank you again. It's my great pleasure to have Alan deliver this webinar for us. Before we get started, there is a couple of housekeeping things that I just wanted to go through very quickly. The 2 most common questions that we normally get is is this going to be recorded and can I get a copy afterwards? The answer to that question is yes. We will be sending this out afterwards for everyone's review and so they can have a look at the presentation in their own time. As well as, will there be a Q&A section in this presentation? And yes, there will be. If I could just ask for people to hold their fire and ask questions at the end of the presentation. There is 2 options for you. There is a Q&A tab at the bottom of your toolbar, or alternatively, there is a chat functionality there as well. So either or, if you want to put your question into one of those, that would be amazing. Understandably, as you can appreciate, there is also some training that we would like to offer as a consequence of this webinar, and we will be providing some special deals for those who are in attendance. So please do look out for that particular slide when we get to it later in the presentation. So without further ado, I just wanted to very quickly hand the reins over to Alan Fell. Alan's one of our very long-standing subject matter experts in relation to strategy management. Alan has been a fantastic partner delivering right across the world, in the UK, in the Middle East, and obviously here in the Asia Pacific region. So without further ado, I might hand it over to you, Alan. Thank you so much, and away you go.
Okay, Fuzzy, thank you. I hope you can hear me. Very good. Okay, well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. With me, it's just 6 a.m. in the morning, early morning in London, but it's great to be with you. And what I want to do in this short session is just share some thoughts on literally making strategy work in the world we live in today, which is getting ever more challenging. We'll talk at the end about some of the regular management tools that we use on this, and that takes us into just a brief introduction to the training sessions. But I really want to focus on the practicalities of business. And I should say before I get into any slides, I'm very much a practitioner. I'm not an academic. I don't look at this in the world of intellectual nicety. I look at what practically works with real businesses who are struggling to survive in a very difficult world. So it's very sort of practical approach that I try to bring to all this. So let me start. Make sure this is all working. So brief introduction from me. I'm British, as you probably gathered already. First half of my career as a commercial banker in London, working with one of the big UK banks. But actually, most of that career was in the field of corporate performance management within the bank itself. And we were a huge organization, well over 100,000 people scattered around the world. So a lot of practical experience of making these techniques work in the real world. And then about 25 years ago, I decided to leave and be an independent consultant and trainer. That's what I've done. And my focus has been particularly on balanced scorecards, on KPIs, key performance indicators, measuring the right things, and the wider subject of strategy execution. Now, why is it that so many people have a strategic plan and yet so few successfully implement that plan? My focus has been global, as Vasi said, predominant focus in the Middle East. I actually visit Dubai far more frequently than I visit the center of London. So Dubai has very much been my second home, and the APAC region as well. I was counting up recently. I reckon I've been in Singapore about 60 times over the last 25 years. And I have to say, with due respect to Sydney and Melbourne and everywhere else, Singapore is my favorite location. If I had to move from London, that's where I'd want to go to, I have to say, if they'd have me, and of course, if I could afford it. So very briefly, a long practical background, 30 years experience with balanced scorecards, and I've been a senior associate at the Balanced Scorecard Institute since 2010, and I've run countless of their programs, again, in the Middle East, Malaysia, Pakistan, UK, and in Australia quite a few times. So that's just brief background. In other words, a lot of practical experience. So what I just wanted to cover in this was a few thoughts about managing turbulence and making strategy work more generally. And then for the last few minutes, I'll finish off and do a brief introduction to an overview of the three management tools that we want to talk about: the balanced scorecard, the KPIs, and OKRs, and just some thinking about that. And again, from a practical point of view, not just conceptual. The challenge, I think the fundamental challenge I see is this. I mean, every organization you meet claims to have some sort of strategic plan. And those plans come in various shapes and sizes, depending partly on the organization and on how much effort has been put into it. But they will all claim to have some view of the future that they want to achieve. And yet, stubbornly, the rate of failure remains very high. Part of this may be external turbulence, we'll touch on in a moment. But there are a lot of internal issues as well. So a lot of my work, particularly in the last 15 years, has really been focused on why is it that people fail to implement the strategy that they have? What are the factors? What are the things we can do? What are the practical solutions? And one of the courses that the Institute has launched recently, and I'm a co-author of that course, is a certificate in strategy execution, where we really focus exclusively on that question of how can we be better at implementing the strategy that we have. And obviously we've got turbulence and disruption. and that's very topical given Donald Trump and his antics in recent weeks. Whatever you think of them, and we won't get into the politics of any of that at all. It's just the business impact. What are the critical success factors and indeed the common failure factors of both planning and execution? I want to just touch on that and then go through 3 proven management tools that really help us to perform a bit better. So that's the focus. Managing turbulence, disruption. Now, I mean, we've all been through the COVID pandemic. Many of us went through the financial crisis, 2008. And some of us, longer years, have been through lots of other crises. But there's a constant theme of disruption, transformation. And the phrase that I've seen so often in very recent years has been digital transformation. And people focus on it as though it's something entirely new. Of course, we've been going through digital transformation for 50 years, frankly, but nonetheless, massive impact. We have the emerging impact of AI, and people are still grappling to understand just how significant that impact is going to be. But I think everyone recognizes a pretty fundamental impact on businesses of all sorts around the world as we learn to use and learn how not to misuse AI. That's going to be a real challenge in the next 5-10 years, I think. So yeah, we do have our friend Donald Trump, who is the key disruptor. And again, whatever you think about it, he's causing disruption in the business world and causing people to think afresh. And many would say that's a healthy thing in itself, although how it's done, will vary. And more generally, the saying, you have to break some eggs to make an omelette. And a general sense of very often you have to take 1 step back to be able to take 2 forward. But we're into a world of constant change, and therefore, how do we manage ourselves during that constant change and still keep a focus on what is our ultimate strategic ambition? And that's a real practical challenge that I think everyone faces today. I do just want to emphasize that turbulence is not new. I have run, with Informa, who I've been involved with for nearly 30 years now, I have run literally hundreds of training programs around the world. And one of the features I notice, particularly with younger people, is a sense that sort of disruption, transformation, whatever you wish to call it, is kind of new, and the past was nice and stable, and then suddenly things are starting to get very bumpy. And I think we've always had disruption and transformation going on. And just to illustrate the point in a slightly personal angle, I just wanted to show this. That's a former passenger liner. I grew up in the north of England in Liverpool, famous seaport, probably more famous today for the football team. But it was, especially in the past, a great seaport and a major point for leaving the UK by passenger liner before we would get on a plane. And that's a particular ship that I always admired in Liverpool, the Oriole, and it used to sail from Liverpool down to West Africa with various stops on the route. And one of my uncles was actually chief engineer on that ship, on that very ship, and he loved the experience until his wife eventually made it clear he was going to get a shore job and spend more time looking after the children than enjoying himself on the very nice passenger liner, even though he had a job to do. But if we go to 1958, suddenly, within the space of a few months, 3 first-generation long-haul jets, passenger jets, came into service. The Comet 4, followed by, only a couple of months later, the Boeing 707, and a few months later than that, the Douglas DC-8. And by far the most iconic of the 3, the 707. Suddenly, it seemed almost overnight at the time, that we went from a 15-day journey to a 6-hour journey. And the world was transformed. And I can remember those ships disappearing fairly quickly from the seas because they were suddenly obsolete. And you can go back, I'm just thinking, here we are in 2025. If you want to go back 200 years, this is the 200th anniversary of the Stockton and Darlington Railway, the world's first railway, and how that transformed travel 200 years ago. So disruption, transformation, having to think afresh, having to adapt to external changes is nothing new. And I think that's really the point I just wanted to emphasize. So given this ever greater turbulence, does it make any sense to think strategically? And I often meet people and they say, well, what's the point of having a strategic plan? We just survived COVID, blah, 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 blah. What's the point? Is it worthwhile trying to think longer term? Should we simply try and be flexible and adapt to the circumstance we find ourselves in? Well, I think there are arguments for continuing a focus on strategy and then techniques, concepts which help us to manage the turbulence that we experience these days in particular. The first thing is businesses of all sorts. It doesn't matter public or private or family, whatever industry you're in, doesn't matter. We naturally invest in long-term assets. Obviously, the physical assets, you think of buildings, motor vehicles, ships, planes, manufacturing plant, equipment, machinery, and so on. Of course, that has defined lives. But we've also got the intangible. How many organizations are working to build their brand, their image, their reputation, the awareness of them? How many are looking to develop future leaders? How many are developing new products with shelf lives, maybe 3, 5, 10, 15 years or more? So in business, we naturally have to think long term, even though the world is changing around us. And I often liken this to satellite navigation systems in cars. And I recall recently I was traveling, as I seem to commute almost between my home and London Heathrow Airport to catch an Emirates flight to Dubai. That's what I seem to do almost every month. And this particular morning, it's a journey of about 110, 115 kilometers. This particular morning, big sign on the motorway, after the next junction, the road is blocked, recommend you divert. So we took a diversion and my driver's satellite navigation recalibrated a new route to get to London Heathrow. And we took that route. And yes, it took a few more minutes. And yes, it probably took a little bit more distance and possibly a little bit more on the taxi meter. But the point is, we didn't lose sight of the destination. The destination was London Heathrow Airport. I didn't just throw my hands up in horror and say, oh, well, never mind the airport. Can we just find a nice shopping center or a nice restaurant for breakfast or something? That sounds crazy. We still keep in mind the destination, the strategic ambition, what we like to call strategic goals, strategic results, corporate goals, whatever it is that represents the long-term ambition of our organization. I mean, we have vision statements, but they tend to be just general words that open to a lot of interpretation. We need more specific goals, which are clearly set out in SMART terms, so we know what it is we're trying to achieve. What's the destination? And that's what we have to do in business. We have to act like satellite navigation systems. We have to recalibrate if the road ahead suddenly becomes more difficult for whatever reason. Just as we speak today around the world, governments and businesses are working out the impact of the new tariffs that the US has just announced. Again, whether you think that's a good or bad thing, we'll leave completely to one side. They're having to respond to a sudden change of circumstance. And yet, all of these businesses, public or private, still have long-term ambition. Excuse me. So I think we need to keep in mind the satellite navigation example. And more generally, a sense of strategic agility. And here's a question I've asked endless times in endless training programs. How well does your organization respond to sudden unexpected change over which it has no control? Unexpected change will happen. And when I talk to people, I very often get the reaction, "Oh yeah, Mr. Allen, yeah, we're pretty good at managing our agility. If things happen, we can adjust." And so I ask, what is built into your strategic plan to give you that flexibility, that agility, that ability to respond quicker than the competition? That's the crucial bit. Can you respond quicker and better than the competition or the benchmark if you are a non-profit? And the answer usually is blank, nothing. And just an example. If you think about the typical commercial business, income stream, costs. Income streams are becoming ever more volatile for the reasons we've just touched. So when I ask people, to what extent have you built in flexibility into your cost base to give you the ability to downscale your expenses if your income is downscaled for whatever reason? You know, in 25 years of asking that question, hundreds of events, I can only remember one organization where someone said, yes, very specifically, we do that. We have a target for variable costs, fixed and variable costs. We have a target for variable costs. We want to ensure that if the income stream drops away quickly, suddenly, unexpectedly, we can reduce our cost base commensurately. Most people don't think like that, but that's how I would suggest to you we should be thinking. We used to do that in my former bank 30 years ago when I did some very much pioneering work in balanced scorecards. One of our objectives was increased cost flexibility. We had a KPI around it. I was the owner of that KPI. And it was my job to, working with colleagues, to increase the proportion of our cost base which was flexible. In other words, we could reduce that cost or eliminate it at short notice if we had to. And there are all sorts of tools and techniques you can get into to do that. Again, beyond what we're trying to do today, but lots of things we can do. So I think the sort of questions we have to ask is, let's step out of the conventional thinking. How do we respond to sudden unexpected change? And this is, I want to repeat this point. To me, the most important is, and can we do this better than the competition? I remember a low-cost airline in Europe, very famous low-cost airline, and they were being interviewed a few days after 9/11. Those of you who can remember back the 9/11 catastrophe in New York and Washington, but New York especially, in 2001 now. And this guy ran and still runs a very, very successful low-cost airline. And 3 days after 9/11, he was interviewed and he said, for us, this is a competitive advantage. He said, we have already adjusted our strategy. We have already adjusted the scheduling of some of our new plane deliveries, but we will not be reducing our profit forecast. We will not be reducing our overall growth forecast. We're just going to manage the business differently. And he said the competitive thing is the state-owned airlines who we compete with, particularly in those days, said it'll take them 6 months to decide who should be on a committee to consider the matter. Now, obviously an exaggeration, but nonetheless, there's a lot of truth in it. If you respond quicker than the competition, you take huge advantage. And that's the point. And so how can you structure your strategic plan and have the ability to, as it were, move around the chess pieces, change your priorities, change your resource scheduling to meet sudden unexpected change? That's the sort of question we need to think about. And so, you know, strategic plans that are just words, and a lot of them I've seen over the years have been mainly words, difficult to change. If we say today, well, exporting into the US is going to be more difficult, so we're going to put more focus on, from a European point of view, more focus on Asia, less focus on USA, North America. Well, fine, we understand that, but it's when you translate it into numbers. If you actually say currently we're 50-50 and our aim is to adjust very quickly to 70-30, then you can start to reassemble the plan to deliver that 70-30 solution you're looking for. And that's one of the key reasons why we use the balanced scorecard system. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment or two. So if I think about the 4 main steps of strategy management, I like to look at this in big picture, simple terms. So I can see 4 stages. We have the strategic analysis and thinking, the SWOT analysis, the 5 forces, the competitor analysis, whatever techniques. There are lots and lots of techniques, but whatever we do, let's understand the environment we operate in. Let's understand ourselves. Let's think about what it is that we should sensibly be focused on in future. Number 2, actually formulating that big picture strategy, making choices. Michael Porter, the famous guru on the subject, often describes strategy as choosing what not to do. Not choosing what to do, choosing what not to do. In other words, in what area do we have focus? And then we convert it into a strategic plan. That's where it often goes wrong. And then we look to execute the plan. So if I think about my long experience at this and marking these out of 10, how would I see it? I would say generally, strategic analysis is done pretty well. A lot of effort is put into it. I came across an organization only last year where they had what they called a strategic plan. 20 pages, fine. Enough for a medium-sized business. But of those 20 pages, 16 pages were the strategic analysis, effectively a very comprehensive SWOT type of analysis. There was very little planning. It was all analysis. But that in itself was done quite well. We formulate our strategy. And again, a lot of thought goes into that, particularly at a senior level, people making these big decisions, what markets, what products or services, what sort of technology change are we thinking about, and so on and so on. We then convert that, and I'm only going to give it 5 out of 10, into a strategic plan itself. In other words, the actual plan. Who is going to do what, with what resource to deliver what result? And whether we're talking about business units, departments, small teams, individuals. Do we have a plan? And many of the problems of execution are, in my judgment, caused by poor planning in the first place, planning that is incomplete or unrealistic. And then finally, execution itself, and I'm going to give it 4 out of 10, because for a whole variety of reasons, a lot of it, problems baked into the planning stage, we often struggle. So that would just be my overall assessment. And I just sort of think about these questions. When people fail to implement a plan, was it a poor plan, or is it a good plan but poor execution? And the average response I find from people is to say, well, it was a good plan, we worked hard at it, maybe we had some outside consultancy to help us, but it's poor execution but the poor execution is caused by outside factors. So we'll blame all the external disruptive factors that we touched on earlier. Whereas in reality, a lot of the problem is really in the plan itself. So that's something I've really honed in on in recent years. The problems of execution are baked in to the plan in the first place. I just very briefly want to touch on 5 of the common failure points, both in planning and execution. We can pick up any particular issues in the Q&A session if you'd like to explore a little bit more. So we think about the planning side. First of all, no overall SMART goals. In other words, the destination is vague. If you don't know where you want to get to, any road will take you there. Famous quote, I think, on that subject. Poor alignment, both horizontal and vertical, in the organization. I can very often see a corporate organization level strategic plan, but when I ask about, so where are the plans for the departments that contribute to it? It's missing. Or the alignment is just not there. So each individual department or business unit seems to do its own thing in splendid isolation, but it's not linked in to what the organization as a whole wants to achieve. Very common. KPIs. This is a classic area where simply inappropriate KPIs, inappropriate targets. Target setting is very weak. Just a quick example, one that always sticks in my mind. If I ask any group of people, how important is it that our employees have the skills necessary for the future strategy? Of course, everyone will say yes. And I say, do you measure your skills? And some do, most don't. But even those that do, when you say, how do you measure it? Oh, well, we measure, we set a target that every employee has got to undertake 40 hours training in the year. That's their KPI and target. That just doesn't deliver a practical answer. You're measuring an input, and people will attend training programs to make up the quota they have to, not because they are relevant to their needs for their current job or immediate future job. It doesn't impact necessarily on skill level. It's just an activity, some of which is relevant, obviously, but quite a lot is not. As a trainer, I often have people on courses who are simply making up the hours necessary to achieve their 40 hours or whatever it may be. So inappropriate KPIs, big subject. Too many projects, so common. I won't say any more about that. And finally, the cultural side, the softer side, is ignored in the planning. If you have a conversation with typical senior management, and there are 2 topics. One is about, we want to develop and launch a new product or open a new branch in Singapore or whatever it might be. Yeah, everyone's into that. It's tangible. It's something they understand. It's kind of comfort zone. If you talk about, well, we need to strengthen the performance culture and we need to do things to strengthen the performance culture. Ooh, that's all a bit tricky. Yeah, we'll think about that next week, next month, next year. Never. This is what happens a lot. Execution. So now we're trying to implement the plan. So what are the things that can go wrong? Ineffective leadership and governance. Huge. Top management who are more focused on operational issues for which they feel comfortable than really leading strategically the organization. Bad governance structures that are ineffective, unclear accountability, responsibility, and so on. The capability of managing projects is often low. How many projects overrun? And now, is that poor project planning? Maybe. How much of it is poor project execution? Non-alignment of strategy and operations. So the strategy says we should be going in this direction, but our operations are pointing over here. Very common. So people are not working together to achieve a common agenda. They're working in splendid isolation, going in different directions. Ineffective performance measurement, monitoring, the management of performance in all sorts of ways. I think particularly about the conduct of the typically the monthly executive review meeting. Some of those meetings are wonderful. They could be videoed and put on YouTube as an example of the best practice. But I have sat in and often disrupted countless executive performance review meetings, which have been hopeless, which are embarrassing. And I'm afraid I tend to jump in and say, listen, guys, let's focus this. This is about making decisions, not endless talking. This is about focus on the subject, not being diverted. The conduct of those meetings is fundamental, even if we have the right KPIs, the right data, and everything else in place. And finally, communication, change management, again, the cultural focus. Communication of strategy is typically very poor. Again, there are some good examples. They're great and we should celebrate them. But on average, when I do training programs with people about strategy execution, to improve communication is usually one of the top 3 items that people go away with. They go away with an action plan, things to focus on, but in the top 3, usually it's improve communication of strategy. So people know what their job is, they know what collectively they're trying to achieve, and they know on a very regular basis how well we're progressing, and do we need to adjust, do we need to be agile to get there. So poor communication and poor change management. So the good news, and this is a very brief part of it, the good news is management tools that can help us to minimize the problems that we've just been touching on. But I emphasize, provided these tools are used properly. And over my last 25, 30 years of training consulting, so often I come across organizations who will claim to have one of these systems we'll touch on. Do you have a balanced scorecard? Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, we have one, yes. Do you see it? Oh, no, I'm not allowed to see it. It's confidential. Okay. Oh. Do you have a balanced scorecard in your department, for your department? No, I don't think so. So they claim they've got a balanced scorecard. They don't see it. There's no communication. They haven't cascaded it, but they'll claim they have a balanced scorecard. They are not using it properly. I don't mean the individual. I mean the organization collectively. And of course, that's responsibility of the strategy management manager, whoever, the chief strategy officer. These days, we often use the title. So people claim to have these tools, but often they're poorly designed, and in particular, they are poorly used. And I think that's the crucial factor. So yes, we have the balanced scorecard. We'll just briefly talk about each in a moment. We have KPI systems, not necessarily incorporated with a scorecard. They may be just standalone KPI dashboards. And we have the OKR system, which has taken on increased prominence in recent years. So just brief thoughts about each. And just to emphasize the timing of programs that Informa Australia is running. Starting date-wise in Singapore, May the 7th with OKRs, and then in the Gold Coast with the balanced scorecard, May the 12th, and the KPI program on May the 19th. So I'll describe those briefly in a moment. So the balanced scorecard, it's all about integrated planning and performance. And the whole thing is, if you plan and then monitor performance in the same format, it helps enormously. Many organizations still do not really do that. So planning and execution using the same tool. Widely regarded as the #1 tool for managing strategy. It's been around a long time, and it's evolved over the 30-odd years it's been around, but it remains a very widely used, very popular, very relevant tool today. And it combines the visual strategy summary, the strategy map, and the KPIs and the supporting projects. Very straightforward, logical approach. And it supports regular progress monitoring. Organizations do this at different frequency. I think monthly is the most common, certainly at a corporate level. It can be operationally and at more frequent basis for departments and small teams and so on. And here's just a brief schematic. And without getting into a lot of detail here, this is a famous slide from the Institute. And we're just looking at the main components of a balanced scorecard system. So the first one is essentially setting out the big picture, the vision, the mission, the overall strategy. The second one, the famous strategy map. I say famous, I think it's widely understood, but a great way to establish your strategy in a very summarized visual format, shows the cause and effect linkages that collectively make up the overall strategy of the organization, and a great way of using it to communicate to people what our organization is trying to do. The KPIs and targets, the performance measures. So we translate our strategic objectives, our components of strategy, into relevant, and I emphasize relevant KPIs with appropriate targets, and then with supporting projects. If we want to take our performance from here to here, we need to do things to raise performance. Those are the initiatives. We cascade, typically from company down to departments or business units, and ultimately down to small teams and individuals, what's known as Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. But the process of alignment is crucial. I, as an employee, am focused on what do I do to contribute to my department's plan and strategy. If I'm head of a department, what does my department do to contribute to the overall organization? So alignment, so important. It works. It's proven over the years that on average, organizations that use it perform better than those that don't. And it's simply the discipline of clear articulation, clear measurement, and the management, performance management disciplines that go around it. And the training program, 5 days, it's been delivered in multiple global locations. I personally have run this course about 45 or 50 times around the world, based on a very well-established methodology, the 9 steps to success. Certification from George Washington University, which gives it external independent status. And there's an end of course exam that people have to take. So that's briefly the balanced scorecard. KPIs, Peter Drucker, the famous management consultant, often called the grandfather of modern management. What gets measured gets managed. And the problem is, do we select the right KPIs? Just a very brief story. I came across an organization a few years ago in the Middle East. And the chief executive said to me, look, I wonder if you can come and help us. He said, we have all of the KPIs we could possibly need. But what I would like you to do is to use this concept of a balanced scorecard system to help to separate between the strategic KPIs that I, as the chief executive, and the board of directors should review once a month, and the executive team, and the more operational day-to-day, week-to-week measures that we should be looking at, definitely, but they are managed typically at a lower organization level. Can you just help us to separate and put it in the structure of a balanced scorecard? But he said, we have all of the KPIs we could possibly need. So we went through developing the balanced scorecard methodology. 2/3 of the KPIs at corporate level were new. They were strategic KPIs. And I still remember the chief saying to me when we sort of launched it, he said, you've really shocked me. He said, I've been 30 years in this industry. I'm now chief executive of a pretty big business. I thought I knew it all, and you've just proved I've been flying blind. I said, well, don't think of it that way. Think of it, you've got a better dashboard in front of you now. And the key issue for that company was increasing market share, which this better focus that the strategic KPIs gave them helped them to achieve. So it worked very well. But we've got all of the KPIs. No, you may have a lot of KPIs, but do you have the most relevant ones? In particular, do you have the most strategic ones? This is really just saying that there are various categories of KPIs, and any good KPI management system will incorporate all of these. But the ones that we are ultimately interested in the top right-hand corner, the strategic KPIs, those are the ultimate results. But a good KPI system will have all the other categories: risk KPIs, project KPIs, and all the operational stuff. Methodology we use in the training program is the MPRA. It looks a bit complicated, and I'm not going to go through all the individual components, but just to say there is a proper structured methodology we use to help us to identify the right KPIs and to use them effectively. And I emphasize the importance of using these things effectively. So again, 5-day program, also delivered around the world. I've done this countless times. The way we teach it is to link into the scorecard to provide that strategic context. But you can certainly use this without having to have a balanced scorecard in the first place. You may just create a KPI management system. Again, it's endorsed by GWU, and an exam just to keep people switched on and focused during the course. And finally, OKRs, just very briefly: objectives, key results, objectives, qualitative, key results, quantitative. A couple of examples on the screen. So if you get a copy of this recording, you'll see it there. It's evolved over the time. There's a tendency perhaps to think of it as sort of fairly new technique, but actually it's been evolving like so many management techniques. It's evolved over the years, and it's changed its titling to some extent, but now it's very well established. It's especially associated with the big technology companies, in particular Google. Google, I think, have made a big play of using OKRs, and the advocates of OKRs, of course, use Google as a great case study in helping this enormously successful business using the OKR tool. We find organizations often combine, excuse me, I just have a quick slurp of tea. We find organizations often combine a strategic balanced scorecard with operational OKRs, and I think that fits very neatly together. So it's perhaps worth saying, I don't think there's a competition between balanced scorecard and OKR. I think they complement each other very effectively if you choose to use it that way around. The point of OKRs is short-term results rather than long-term strategic thinking. What are we going to achieve? What are our objectives and key results we want to achieve in the next 3 months? That is typically the framework. So it's very much action-orientated to get short-term results. It's a 3-day training course coming up in Singapore, I think, is the first one we mentioned. Widely used to create focus on achieving short-term results. It's about getting things done. Again, certification from GWU and an online exam. So I'm going to hand back to Fassi at this stage. I just hope those few thoughts have helped and maybe triggered 1 or 2 ideas in your mind. So over to you, Fassi.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Alan. Really appreciate that presentation, and in particular going through the three different courses that we do deliver for those who are potentially interested in looking to get certified across the Balance Scorecard, KPIP, or OKR certifications. As mentioned, we do have these dates available for the first half of this year, as well as a separate intake for the second half of the year. But for ease of reference, we do have these dates coming up. The first course, obviously, OKR in Singapore, and then the two, a Balance Scorecard and KPIP in May on the Gold Coast. Just for those who are on the call with us, as a show of gratitude for your attendance today, we do have a special discount offer of 10%, as you can see there. And if you are interested in looking to register, or if you've got any other questions or queries, please don't hesitate to contact my colleague Shashil, who would be more than happy to assist in relation to your queries or questions. With that in mind, I think what we'll do, Alan, is we'll go over into having a Q&A. I'm sure, hopefully, that there's some questions or queries from people in relation to your presentation. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A box, or alternatively the chat option. And then I'm sure we can try and get through as many as we possibly can. Just whilst we're allowing for that to happen, Alan, I did have a question for you, and I'm hoping you can sort of clear this out for everyone that's on the call. It's one of those things that you hear not regularly, but enough to sort of make it a point to ask you. Do you think that the Balance Scorecard has been around for such a long time that it's out of date?
No, this is a very common question, and thank you. The concept is, I think, just as relevant today as when Kaplan and Norton sort of launched it through the Harvard Business Review way back in 1992, which I can remember, but I'm sure most people on the call will not remember. The concept is quite simply that we should describe our strategy, business strategy, in a more explicit form, and then monitor actual performance as a means of keeping on track. So I think that fundamental remains, and strategy remains an important aspect of any business, as we covered earlier. The precise way that people use it has evolved, of course, quite dramatically over the period. And what a lot of organizations do today is they understand the basic concept, but then they customize, sometimes quite radically, how they are going to use the concept for their particular organization. And some people just make minor changes. Typically, I find in the public sector, people keep more to what I might call the basic Harvard template. But in the private sector, people really do vary a great deal. And I think the crucial issue is keep in mind the principles, whilst give yourself the flexibility to adapt it and customize it in whichever way you think is most appropriate. And the question I just ask people, they say, can I do this? Can I have, Mr. Allen, can I have 5 perspectives and not 4? I said, if it helps you manage your business better, do it. If it doesn't help you manage your business, don't do it. It's very simple. Yeah.
Very good. We've got another question here, more so related to the to KPIs. Alan, so the question is there a danger that KPIs create the wrong behavior?
Oh, absolutely. If you have the wrong KPI, I mean, at the end of the day, any KPI in a performance management system are ultimately on the receiving end as a human being. We can be as automated as we like, but ultimately a human being is responsible. Whether it's increasing customer satisfaction, improving process productivity, enhancing skills of people, whatever it might be, it doesn't matter. And if you define the KPI wrong, you get the wrong behavior. And I think one of the crucial issues is always think about the behavioral response to the individual on the receiving end. If I just give you a very quick example, I think time allows. There was a famous case where an airline in the USA was looking to speed up baggage retrieval at the end of a flight. And of course, there's nothing worse than you go on a 1 hour flight and then you wait an hour for your bag to come round. So they wanted to speed that up. Good idea. But they basically defined the KPI and the target, which was a speed up over what they were previously achieving, as the time between the plane arrives at the gate, which is timed, and when the bags start to come round, which is timed, should be no more than 20 minutes. And that seems reasonable. But the behavior of the baggage handlers, who I think we can agree do an awful job, was to take one bag from the plane, put it on the back of the belt, press the button, and that bag would come round. Because the target was the first bag. There may be still 299 bags, but if you'll excuse the French, please, to hell with them, because the target was the first bag.
Mm.
So here's a good business objective, a good business idea. Let's speed it up. But defined wrong created the wrong behavior. And I've seen countless variations of that theme over the years. So think about the behavioral response. So very, very important. One of the reasons why I like to get HR involved in this as much as possible, because they hopefully are looking at things from a more human behavioral point of view than perhaps the typical strategy manager or business manager who's more data driven.
Got it. That's really interesting. I like that little example you gave, Alan. Nice spin on the answer. That's very good. I've got one for you. Just while
Yeah.
we're waiting for anyone else that would like to ask any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A box or the chat functionality. With respect to OKRs, Alan, how widespread do you think they are in terms of their adoption and implementation? And I know you mentioned that Google is one one user, but yeah.
A short answer is I don't know. And I mean, I have researched this and I can't find any information. I think the general conclusion is, number one, it is widely used these days. But two, that there's no clear single OKR focus. There's no sort of global champion for OKRs. There are lots of good people who are working on this. But whereas for some techniques, I mean, the balanced scorecard, for example, was very much led by Kaplan and Norton, the originators, and they were very much the global focal point of this for many years. I think that, well, one passed away, one's retired, I think. But you don't have the same with OKR. So I simply don't know what the take-up is. I do know from conversations and experiences that it's widely used in all types of organizations. And it is slightly unfortunate that many of the examples quoted at the moment are about the high-tech companies. So you see it, Google, Microsoft, Netflix, and a few others. And that's fine. And I obviously find them very useful. But there are also examples in other industries. So in no way is it purely a technique that is suitable for the technology companies. I think that's the message. And I think it is widely used, but I haven't seen any data at all to say, 10% or 30% or 50%. Yeah.
Understood. No worries. Well, I think we'll leave it there, Alan. Unless there's any other further questions, might give everyone another 5 or so seconds just to put in any last minute questions or burning questions that anyone might have. But otherwise, if that's not the case, I did want to take this opportunity to thank you again, Alan, for getting up so early in the morning. It's I know it's 6 a.m. is a little bit of an early start to be engaged and active to do a webinar. So I really appreciate the time for you to do this. And as always, I appreciate your participation in delivering these courses for us at Informa, as well as our partner at Balanced Scorecard Institute. So really appreciate your expertise on these matters. And yeah, so thank you so much to everyone as well for attending. We really appreciate your participation on this webinar. There will be an email that will go around so you can see the recording of this particular session. And if you do have any questions or queries, please reach out to Shashil, and his contact details are at the bottom of that slide, as you can see there. And we hope to see as many of you on one of our courses in the very near future. So Alan, thank you so much again, and wishing you all the best.
Okay, my pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.